We're talking about J.P. Morgan. Jamie Dimon, CEO of America's biggest bank by assets, J.P. Morgan, Chase, during their last annual investor day this February, had to answer a whole lot of problems because investors, a lot of them want J.P. Morgan to be broken up. The problem? The Dodd-Frank regulations make it a lot less profitable to be a big bank. So J.P. Morgan responded. They outlined a fresh spate of cost-cutting measures, a plan to shed at least $100 billion in certain deposits in what's called an inverted bank run. Jamie Dimon, the CEO, essentially conceded that J.P. Morgan now faces higher compliance costs and other costs as a result of its size and as a result of Dodd-Frank, but he says his bank will cut expenses, cut branches, reduce deposits, and place fees on institutional depositors in order to reduce the amount of money that they have. So here's the thing. We've got the same thing going on with Bank of America. They tried a similar approach to collect fees from all their depositors, but it was too unpopular and it didn't work. Industry experts are saying that J.P. Morgan's public announcement will probably set off a scramble among institutional clients to find cash to invest in other places. But it's not just J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, which are the two biggest banks. Big banks in general are seeing that their earnings aren't growing as fast as the rest of the financial industry. It's actually small banks now that we see assets are growing in for the most part. And on top of all of this, we've got the stress tests, which essentially are requiring banks to set up for all kinds of crazy situations, that whatever kind of collapse, whatever kind of major changes could happen in the economy and horrible things in the financial system, the banks have to show that the way that they are set up, that they would not collapse and that they would be able to keep functioning normally. And if they can't prove this to the Federal Reserve and to the regulators, then they can't pay out to their investors and they can't function in a lot of the ways they want to. So all these regulations added up on top of each other are making me a very happy person. And I think that it's about time some of the people in here give credit to the Obama administration for all the things that they've done to make our financial system more stable, more secure, and to help out with smaller banks and with more innovation and make sure that the big banks are following all the rules.
Okay, but you can't necessarily give the credit of Dodd-Frank and all these other regulatory implements exclusively to the administration because, you know...
Okay, Obama...
They pushed back. They had to be convinced to sign them.
No, they didn't have to. Obama and the Democrats in Congress. Okay, the Democratic Party at large.
Like the liberal wing, the liberal
which is
Democrat, the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party.
It wasn't Chuck Schumer.
It wasn't Chuck Schumer, right?
But I'm not arguing for Chuck Schumer though. Elizabeth Warren's a beast, but yeah, I'm very glad to see all this happening.
I would say that still, at the end of the day, you're still beating around the bush because until you reinstall the Glass-Steagall, the Glass-Steagall Act, which basically says that banks, as in banks that take your money and do loans and basic transactions like that, cannot become investment banks when they're buying securities and risking that money on the open market. And until you do that and you break down the largest banks, which is what Warren wants to do and a lot of other reformers, you're not going to really fix the problem. There's always going to be somebody that's going to break the rule. There's always going to be people that are going to find loopholes around the rule. That's why if you look at tax code, there's tons of accountants that just focus on finding loopholes. And the banks, with all their money and power and resources, can do the exact same thing in terms of finding loopholes. The other thing is, too, on personal banking, is I'm a big advocate of credit unions. Small community banks are great, too, but if everybody put their money in a credit union, which has interest in the community and gets everybody involved, it would be so much better if we could take our money away.
But that's what's happening now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm really happy about.
Because every employer has their own bank, basically. State Farm has their own bank. They're trying to, they're a 49th banking company, insurance agency.
And that's the point about credit unions. Unlike banks, especially like the Bank of America and J.P. Morgan companies like that, they don't put their money out and risk it like that. That's why I was a big advocate of
right, and it's the thing.
Your bank day, basically.
And credit unions take a lot of losses, but it's based off of employees and direct deposits, and that it's set up in a way to they can they cover their losses.
That's right.
And but you're dealing with a big bank. There's not that intimacy there. It's almost when you go into the bank, they devalue your business. If not, they feel like they don't need it.
All the time, you see scare stories about how banks have fees and overdraft and all this kind of stuff.
And it's only the big banks it's only Bank of America, Wachovia, and Chase that have these crazy I've been banking with Delta for 5 years now, and there's zero overdraft fee. When you get your money, we'll just put it back, and there's no fee at all.
Well, it is in this era of Obama Wall Street regulations that we see that the credit unions and the small banks are the ones that are growing faster in assets. We're certainly seeing that as the case now.
It's a result of the financial crisis.
Earnings and assets are growing much more quickly for smaller banks.
And you have to give credit to the financial crisis for that. You can't say it's the administration, because people, once the financial crisis hit, people became wary of big banks.
But why are the big banks growing so slowly?
Because, again, going back, number one...
Because they're too big already. There's no more growth to go.
How
much bigger can you get?
Hold on, Joey.
How bigger can you grow?
Aren't they bigger than they were in 2007, 2008?
Yes, because they bought each other.
Even now that they're planning on downsizing, aren't they still bigger than they were back then?
Yeah, but they're smaller as a percentage of the overall
they were so big
financial
that they destroyed
system.
the global
financial
economy.
system is bigger.
So yeah, they need to be smaller.
Yeah,
so I mean, it
seems like they're getting to a point where you can't be too big to fail. If you're too big, you cannot operate and function. So they have to downsize because.
And I think the thing is too. You're talking about the rise in the credit unions and small banks. That's because of two things. Number one, people already before the financial crisis were realizing that the services they offered and things like that were so much better. And now with the advent, of course, the internet and technology and e-transfers and PayPal and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to have the same bank in every single city that you might be in, because it's all done online.
Well, the financial industry as a whole has gotten bigger since then, but the big banks are making up a smaller part of that. So here's
the reason why they became less popular with the public. That was a matter of consumer confidence. When people saw on the news that these banks were failing or in danger of failing, they did
got
not
screwed
feel
by him
secure
personally.
to get loans and security products.
But it is also true that bigger banks have to hold a lot more in terms of what they're holding as capital and what they're holding in their reserves.
That's why they should be broken.
And you know what else?
One
thing, smaller banks work with each other a lot more than bigger banks work with each other. You have, if you're into a credit union, you can go anywhere in the nation and use another credit union who's in that credit pool. You can use their ATM. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't have to. It's not your bank, but because this bank is allied with Georgia's credit union, it's allied with California credit union, and collectively you can use you get all the benefits that you get in Georgia and California. And it's as a customer, isn't that not what you want? And then you don't have to take outrageous fees. Sometimes I was dealing with Bank of America, and I got in 1 month like $300 worth of fees. And like why? And then they charge you a fee, then they charge you a fee for the fee. And and then you dispute it, and they're like, okay, we'll take half the fees off. And it's like they did you a favor. It's crazy.
But here's
all right. So
all right, Scott, I'll let you get in a word.
Well, I mean, you're pretty much talking about Dodd-Frank regulation and stuff, right? But when it comes to regulation, what really matters is how we've had regulation for years. I saw Bill Clinton in an interview talking. I think it was in 2010, talking about how before the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed, there was already violations of it happening. And I mean, it's not
just violations. Like the way the financial system overall worked was all but a few banks were already doing everything that law said not to do, because it didn't apply to all the banks in the first place. The Federal Reserve System had other rules.
All right,
which is one of the reasons that it's really stupid that people bring that argument up when they say, "Oh, we need to bring Glass-Steagall back." It's like Glass-Steagall was not being enforced the way people think of it.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
That doesn't mean it's an argument.
You're acting like Dodd-Frank. You're acting like Dodd-Frank is fixing
fixing
all these things, but it's only fixing it as good as the SEC and the Federal Reserve do their job, and as much as they don't have conflicts of interest.
But let's roll this back. Why was it not being enforced? Because the banks bought the politicians in the first place in the 1980s, 1970s.
But see, this brings it to my big concern here, because in this golden era of financial regulation, right now we've got the so-called Goldman Sachs primary or the Wall Street primary, and the two candidates that are doing the best in this primary are Jeb and Hillary. And so we've got people that are saying, for instance, you got William Cullen, who's a former banker with Goldman Sachs, or former banker who's done a lot of history on Goldman Sachs. And he said that right now the key for Goldman is to have its bets hedged both in businesses and politics. And you can't get any better than Jeb and Hillary. It's a dream come true. They would win either way. And apparently, even Blank Fine himself, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, has indicated that he would be fine with either a Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton presidency.
Yeah, and I will say nobody in the Democratic Party has the backbone to stand up to Hillary Clinton and really challenge her. And she's definitely going to get the nomination. And Jeb Bush,
Bernie Sanders sounds like he'll fight.
He's not going to win.
Interview the other day.
He's not going to win.
Why though?
Hillary's
so corrupt, and everybody knows nobody wants Clinton. If there was a box between somebody else and Hillary Clinton, everyone would choose somebody else. I bet 70% of the country. If you force the country,
it's not true.
If you, not the electorate,
the people actively involved in politics. The people.
That's because they're so used to not having any good choices that they're like win above all.
You guys are getting all fucking torn up about this. First of all, Scott, Bernie Sanders looks like an old man who doesn't have an interest in actually running for the presidency. Meanwhile, there is someone out there, the former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, who has spoken out in kind of a little bit more of a Elizabeth Warren-esque style. Elizabeth Warren also isn't going to run. I like her stance on the financial industry. Yeah. But at least Martin O'Malley is putting himself out there. He was in Iowa, and he does want to restrict the big banks.
He wants to be vice president. He doesn't want to be president. He knows he has no
all right, anyway, so, all right, let's go.
He wants to be vice president. That's all he's doing.
We're talking about Goldman Sachs.
That's all he's doing.
Let's get back to Wall Street. So we're talking about Goldman Sachs. Basically, just to point out, I mean, it all comes down to the regulators, to how corrupt our system is, to the plutocracy. It always comes back to the fucking plutocracy. I mean, a year ago, a trial attorney from the SEC who retired talked about how everyone in the SEC was pretty much too fearful to go against the Wall Street execs, and he kept trying to push them to go against Wall Street executives, and was basically just saying that they wouldn't. They were resistant to it. They wanted to. He said the SEC has become an agency that polices the broken windows on the street level and rarely goes to the penthouse floors. I mean, that's
right.
And I mean, we can see that by what was the first big indictment after the financial crisis. It was a little like Chinese bank or something.
Yeah.
Other than Madoff, like they actually had something to do with the it was some little Chinese bank. It's like, oh, there we go. So there's
some form.
I mean, if the parties are all corrupt. I mean, if we're going to have a president that brought to us by Goldman Sachs, what do we expect? So, I mean, even Paul Volcker, is not happy with how the Volcker rule's been, applied, basically. And how Goldman Sachs is still openly breaking it. They're buying up stuff all over the world, property and companies, and it's in violation of the Volcker rule, but it's just kind of happening. And why? Because Goldman Sachs owns both parties. They don't really.
It's more than just only both parties. There's so much intimidation that goes in. I mean, people have been killed by multinational corporations, and
I would say big banks are no better than the mob or drug cartels.
Oh, worse. They're worse than the mob.
That's what they launder their money. The HSBC launders all the drug cartel money. But the thing is about Wall Street too is that people are addicted to greed and profit and the sense of success. So a lot of it too, going back to the SEC and regulations, that the American public before the crisis did not want this heavy regulation, these big indictments, because if you saw what happened with Enron scandal, how all that investigation, everything that unraveled there, really was part of what fueled the recession. There was a great loss of confidence, I guess, in corporations and the corporate
It was like the first signs of what must have come. Right?
But then, in 2003, 2004,
hold on, Steen. You're saying that the investigations into the criminal activity and the complete shenanigans and crap that was going on with Enron was not... Are you implying it wasn't a good thing because...
No, I'm not implying it wasn't a good thing at all. I'm implying that the fact there's a correlation between these corporations having success and us feeling better about ourselves.
It's not something that's isolated to Enron
it's just a matter of...
So even if...
When American opens a newspaper, or New York Times, or they knew there was anymore, they open their webpage, they open Google, whatever it may be, and they see the headline, stock market soars 3%. Do you think they would feel more confident seeing that and feeling good about themselves and the increase in profit and all this kind of economy's great, blah, blah, blah. The politicians, of course, love it too. Or do you think they want to see Goldman Sachs drops 5% because of investigation?
Right.
Personally, I want to see Goldman Sachs
But
drops
you're
5% because of investigation, because that implies to me that the government is actually working, actually looking to find justice, and despite all the corruption in politics, is actually looking to enforce justice.
I hate to tell you this, but the way Goldman Sachs has woven themselves into the American economy, if they fail, the United States economy drastically.
All right, we got
the world economy. Yeah,
Scott, you got the final word.
No, we got 1 minute left.
What does Goldman Sachs do for me
got 1
or
minute.
you?
We got they have credit.
Can anybody answer that question?
What does Caesar? What does Caesar do for
Sachs
you?
does a lot of,
what does Caesar do?
We got 1 minute. So Joey, I want you to wrap this up by making me feel better about Obama and the Wall Street era, because you started off with sounding like Obama
we've
fixed
got
the problem, but now
the.
after we talked about it a little bit,
Well, but here's my concern. I'm not trying to be the optimist here.
Okay.
We do have a lot of good things going on in terms of the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
Excellent.
And all the things that they're doing.
The head of that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful stuff. Yeah. And right now banks have to, especially the big banks, they have to hold the biggest chunks of all in terms of a huge percentage of their money that they can't lend out, so that if things do go wrong, things do start collapsing, they've got all this money to lean back on, big cash cushions.
How much is it now?
It's 10% is a minimum, but the bigger your bank is, and you have to start going up towards, it's not 20%, but it's up. You have to get into the teens. Mm-hmm. So, but my concern is that banks are already trying to repeal parts of this. They're already going after commodities related stuff. Now I'm worried that they're trying to buy out the next president. I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton's going to go in there and repeal it. I don't know who's going to get elected. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's really concerning to me.